Today we're going to talk about potentially the number one factor for you being a happy person. And that has to do with what researchers call autonomy. Now, autonomy comes from the Greek language, actually two different words, autos, which means self, and nomos, which means law, meaning self-law or self-governance. And we're going to talk about what does it mean to have self-governance and autonomy and what this has to do with your being happy. Hey everybody, Chad Cruiser here with Health and Homestead. The University of Michigan found that people who believe that they are in control of their lives, or what is called autonomy, have the highest levels of happiness. So believing that you're in control of your life and having autonomy is one of the factors for being happy. If you've ever taken like a Psych 101 course in college, or maybe you even learned this in psychology back in high school, but there was a scientist back in the 1960s by the name of Martin Seligman, and he did research, and it was actually kind of torturous research. And so I'm not happy about what was done to these poor animals, but the research does give us a picture of what may happen in human lives also. So Martin Seligman and his researchers took dogs, if I remember correctly, they were beagles, which by the way are probably my favorite breed of dog, but that's beside the point, and they tortured them. The first group, they didn't really torture them, they just strapped them down for a bit and did nothing else to them. The second group, they strapped them down and then they would shock them, but there was a little lever that they could depress with their snout, and as they pressed it down, it would stop the shocking, so they could save themselves from suffering. The third group, on the other hand, they would strap them down, they would shock them, and there was nothing that these poor dogs could do about it. And so then later, they took them out of this predicament they had been in, this being bound up, and they put them in a cage with two sides to the cage separated by a very short fence that the dogs could easily just leap from one side to the other. And once the dogs were put in there, now the first group that had been just strapped down but never shocked, they would then flip on the electricity in the floor and it would begin to shock these poor dogs, and then they would immediately jump to the other side where the floor was not electrified, and the suffering would be over. The second group would, when the floor was electrified, this group had been shocked, but they could turn it off. They, when the floor was electrified, just jumped to the other side. Now the third group, on the other hand, when the floor was electrified, they stood there and began to suffer, and they didn't do anything. Finally, they would just lie down and just take the torture. And the scientists came up with a term that is called learned helplessness. But you can also imagine that happening in the lives of human beings, that people who may have gone through difficult situations over and over and over could learn, oh, there's nothing I can do. I cannot impact the life around me. My decisions, my actions have no part in changing my future for the better. Things just happen to me. And you could see how this can make people, as the research shows, be more depressed, have more anxiety, and higher levels of PTSD, or post-traumatic stress disorder. You can imagine how this could happen in a child who grows up in maybe just a broken home where there's either abuse, and they're just abused over and over, whether they're good, whether they do something wrong, it doesn't matter, they're abused all the time, and they simply learn, well, my actions have nothing to do with the suffering that I live through, and I just have to accept that life is suffering. The same thing could happen with a child that is neglected, that nothing good or bad that they do positively or negatively impacts them, and they think, well, there's just nothing I can do, and they learn helplessness. This could happen in an abusive relationship that somebody's not able to get out of. This can happen in camps where people are tortured, and you can imagine these things can happen in very difficult situations in life. Sometimes it's not even as bad as those things. Some people just get to the point where they're pessimists and, wow, there's nothing I can do about it. I always fail. Nothing ever goes right. And they can learn that very same mentality. But the researchers didn't want to just hurt these animals. They also wanted to learn, are there things that human beings can do to unlearn? If you can learn helplessness, is it also possible to unlearn helplessness? Research on how to return to autonomy. A researcher from Yale conducted a study on depressed elderly people who were living in a nursing home. They asked them to make choices on what food they ate, if they wanted to change the channel on television, to have the furniture rearranged, or if they wanted to change the air conditioning. They also had them request to change policies in the nursing home, and these requests that they asked for were granted. And they found that 93% of those who were given choices to make changes became happier and more active in their lives. This is incredible. So researchers found that if you could identify beneficial things in your life and make a decision to change those things and act upon those things and see the benefits of them, so through this you could unlearn helplessness and you could discover that you actually do have autonomy. So you may have struggled with addiction, you may have struggled with trials in your life, you may have come from a broken home, from a family that maybe struggled with money all the time, and you just think, well, that's just the way it is, the poor man can never get ahead. But then you actually choose, no, I'm going to learn how to deal with my finances. I am going to learn, maybe you struggled with weight problems and you choose, no, I'm going to actually learn to eat healthy and find that your body starts to change, you start to feel better, your mind starts to be clear. When you know that there are beneficial things in your life, to quit smoking, to quit drugs and drinking and all these things, and you say, you know, I'm going to do this, and you go forward and actually do it, your life can be changed and you become a happier person. I want to give you a little history that is quite fascinating about this. There was a man by the name of Horace Mann. He lived from the late 1700s to the mid 1800s, and this man was he was a man who wanted to abolish slavery. He was also one of the directors and the reformers of education in the United States. And he was working with a school, and his goal at the school was to teach in these students what we today would call autonomy. Then what he called this was self-regulation, which is this, what we talked about earlier, this autonomy or autos nomos, this self-regulation, that when we do actually have rules and laws in our lives that we believe this is wrong, this is right, I will do what is right. And he noticed that when he taught the students in this school, they didn't have to overlook the students all the time and make sure they were doing their work, because they were teaching these students to be self-regulating, or what they called self-governing. And doing this is one of the things that we can teach our own children. Rather than just constantly telling them what they have to do, we can tell them, hey, these are the options. What would you like to do? Now, you don't give them the options like, well, what do you want to do this morning? You want to smoke crack, or you want to eat some strawberries? Obviously, nobody's going to do that. But you give them multiple good options, and you train them to be deciders of that which is good. You teach them that which is good and give them options to do these things, and they become thinkers and not mere reflectors of other men's thought. Because this education system that he was trying to develop in the United States slowly descended into the chaos of our modern educational system, which is what we teach from grade school to university. We're not teaching people how to think, we're teaching parrots. We're teaching people to repeat back what we say to them. We call things critical thinking. We ask questions, and in the question, the teacher already knows what answer they want you to give, and you're just supposed to think, what do they want me to say? What should I say? We're not teaching people to be self-governing, to be thinking for themselves, to have autonomy. We're teaching them to go along with what society is teaching them. I know what it's like to go through smoking and trying to quit over and over and over, and finally quitting, and it changed my life. Now I don't want a cigarette at all. And every one of us can get to the point that we can find that victory. Now, I got to be honest with you. I'll just be totally open with you. The change actually happened in my life, that I gained that victory after trying to quit over and over and over, when somebody shared with me something very interesting. And research actually shows one of the most impacting things in many people's lives for finding victory is actually a spiritual experience. Somebody showed me a passage in the Bible that talked about our bodies being the temple of God, and that we're not to destroy this temple. And I realized for the first time, it wasn't just me that wanted to quit. I actually began to believe that God wanted me to quit. And it was at that moment that I gained the victory just like that. And gaining that strength, that we can gain power. And you too can gain power when you choose to go forward in the things that you know to be true. We are promised that power. Your life can be changed if you're willing to go forward. But if you say, well, nothing's ever going to happen, I'm never going to change, that becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy. If you believe you can't make any decisions for the future, that will end up being true. But the good news is that you can make that decision. You can make that decision today to begin to relearn autonomy, that your decisions impact your future, and specifically, if you make good decisions, they're likely to make for a better future for you and potentially for those around you. Now, if you want to know more about this, research has actually shown one of the things that can help you in this is to learn You say, well, I'm not a pessimist, I'm a realist. And many people say that as they're really just pessimist and angry and negative all the time. But the fact is, there are so many benefits. You can actually learn to be more positive. It makes you happier and actually will make better things happen in your life. And I want to share with you some research on that just now. So check out this video right here on learned optimism, the research that has actually been done on this. You do not want to miss this video right here. If you like this video, hit the subscribe button, hit the bell notifications. God bless and have a fantastic day.